Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the special edition of Focus on Liberia. My name is Dennis Jai, and we are broadcasting from Atlanta, Georgia. Today is 42 years since the April 12, 1980 coup d'etat in which President Tobert was assassinated. Since then, we have been confronted with the question, where could the country have been if 1980 coup has not happened? What we all agreed on is the 1980 coup changed Liberia forever. The question that is still being debated is for better or for worse. To discuss this, I have invited Madam Massa Washington, a journalist and former TRC commissioner. Massa, welcome to Focus on Liberia.
Thank you, Dennis. It is a pleasure always.
I've also invited Mr. Michael Patmore. Michael, welcome to Focus on Liberia.
Thank you so much, Dennis. Glad to be here.
Also, I've invited for the first time on Focus on Liberia, Dr. Atimos Gay. Dr. Gay, welcome to Focus on Liberia. Please unmute yourself, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dennis.
And Dr. Gay, I'll come back to you since this is your first time, but let me welcome the statistician and also professor, Mr. Kalebo Gonglo. Mr. Gonglo, welcome to Focus on Liberia.
Thank you, Mr. John. My pleasure.
It is my pleasure to have all of you here. And let me go back to someone who is on Focus on Liberia for the first time. That's the son of Mayfield Bobo Gay. Dr. Gay, welcome to Focus on Liberia.
Thank you so much.
Okay, and just briefly about Dr. Gay, he has a PhD, a university graduate in Christian social ethics and bioethics concentration. That was in 2011. He's a Pew graduate fellow, and Dr. Gay is also an author. And as I mentioned earlier, he's the son of the old Blue Star player Bobo Gay. We're glad to have you, and in a special way, we offer you a bottle of water to say welcome on Focus on Liberia.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Again, we want to welcome all our viewers from across the globe. This is Focus on Liberia, where we educate, we elevate, and promote all things Liberia. In tonight's edition, the question is, has the coup of 1980 changed Liberia for better or for worse? Let me start by going around the room. 42 years ago, when the coup happened, where were you? Let me start with Mr. Michael Patmore.
Oh, wow. Okay. So Saturday morning, April 12, 1980, I was in Congo Town at a relative's house. I was spending the weekend when it was announced that the coup had taken place, and as a predominant member of a Congo background, we were afraid for our safety. We were moved during that day. Within 24 hours, we were moved. I believe 4 different times to different locations, and then I ended up at my grandmother, who is a Bassa woman. I ended up at my grandmother's house, where I finally felt a little safe, and that's where we will remain for a long period of time. So yes, so that's it right there.
Thank you, Michael. Let's go to Dennis Washington. April 12, 1980, where were you?
Well, I was in Monrovia at my parents' house, actually on the old road behind Cabral Estate. There's a town, a Bassa town called Ta Town. Is right behind the Cabral Estate and across from the American Cooperative School. So that's where I was. Actually, the night the coup was taking place, I was actually having a dream, interestingly, and I would say in a weird way, I was dreaming that the executive mansion was floating on the ocean. It was actually tilting like one side like that. And I was standing on the shore with some other kids from the neighborhood, some of who I remember, but I wouldn't say their name. I don't have information. And I was in my sleep. I was like shouting in an excited kind of way. Look at the mansion. It's floating. It's floating. It's floating. And then all of a sudden, I heard this person shaking me and say, "Massa, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up! They killed the president. They killed the president." And I actually thought it was part of the dream. So when I woke up, my stepmom was standing over me, looking very disheveled. My sisters, who I shared, my two sisters that I shared a room with, we had a single bed and then a bunk bed. I was on downstairs on the bunk bed. So my two sisters, the jumper, the whole house jumper, and everybody was like, I was sitting in a daze because I was just having this dream that the mansion was floating. And then my stepmom is shaking us and telling us that who did kill the president, the coup. This was like 6 something in the morning. And then before you know it, all hell broke loose. We heard my father put the radio on and it was playing this Sonny Okosun Revolution music, Who Owns the Land? And the entire Oval was upside down. Our neighborhood was upside down. And the first thing my father did was he ran, he locked the back door, locked the front door to keep us in so that we wouldn't, jump out there. And so that's where I was when the coup happened.
Thank you. Mr. Gonglo.
Well, I probably had a different experience from all of you. I was in Blaze up here. I was in the village. We could go probably stand somewhere before we listen to radio, So I think we heard of the coup like in the evening time. That's when the news kind of filtered to the village. I was in 6th grade at the time, so we're just used to to school, from school, go on the farm. That's all we did in the village. So, in fact, 3 days later, before we really got the feeling of the coup, But on day one, we're actually not even, in the mood. We didn't have all the information. It was just like something has happened in Monrovia. We didn't, So that was my part of Liberia at the time. I was in a village.
Thank you, Mr. Gay or Dr. Gay.
Thank you. I thank you for everybody's stories being shared here. I was in BF Goodrich at a rubber company with my uncle James Innes, who I took custody or charge of me while my mother was in Japan going to school and my dad was in Romania. And I remember that day so well because what I call my godmother next door to my uncle James Innes was one of a mixed heritage. So I saw and heard the fear when soldiers came that night at her house. So I remember so well, and that day has never left my mind as a 5-year-old young boy.
Thank you. And also, I want to share my own experience. And we are urging our listeners, where were you during the coup of 1980? Please write your comments and let us know where were you. For me, just like Mr. Kalevo Gonglo, I was all the way in Sino County, the village of Dodvoken, because Dodvoken is the town. So during the farming season, if I would go to a village, which is 1 hour walk away, so there we were. And like Mr. Gonglo, the news did not come to us until ELWA comes on around 6 o'clock. There where they have their language program, yes. And so that was the time they tuned on the. But before then, when we tuned to the radio, the Liberian languages program, so they started announcing it. And then before that time, you had people. Most of the people from that part of Liberia had run there because they were running behind those guys that were members of the PAC movement. Because of since 79, so they were all in there. Some were looking for gun proof because they were all getting ready to do something. So they were all in the villages all over the place. If you remember, on that side, we had this Zoe called the father of Apollo Jeswin, Charles Jeswin. So people were all on that side looking for gun proof and looking for protection because things were very tense. And those who were members of the power movement were being pursued one way or the other. So when that happened, the man who was supposed to be one of those Zoe came to my father's village. And he was so ecstatic, he was so happy, at the same time confused. He said, the gun being shot by my son killed Tubber. We said, but what? It had no meaning whatsoever. Like his son in the village killed Tubber. But one thing I remember is I was in maybe 3rd grade at that time, and we knew the presidents. So in our mind, the Vice President Benny Warner was taken over. So to us, we counting the presidents now after William Arrow Tolbert, we say, and Benny Warner, thinking that when coup took place, the Vice President would take over. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the stories that you share. And we are waiting on our viewers to share your own story. Where were you when the coup took place? What I want us to look at tonight, the first question is, the coup of 1980, was it necessary? We heard even from the start of the show, the head of state Doe was saying, there have been problems, one of which was rampant corruption. Was the coup of 1980 necessary? Were there problems, or the problems that the coup came to address, did those problems actually exist? Did we have issues for which the coup make us say they wanted to make the coup? Let me start with Mr. Gonglo.
Oh, why? All right. Dennis, on a serious note, I would say this. When you look at events for the first time, if you had to ask this question to someone in 1980, the answer would be definitely yes, it was necessary. But if you look at the confluence of different events that have taken place for the past 42 years, you would then ask yourself, was it not possible to achieve all of what we've achieved so far? The positive side in Liberia, was it not possible to get to what we have now through dialogue or through other forms of protestation? Was it necessary to have a violent demonstration or a violent coup or a civil war? So now if you ask that question, we'll give an answer that in my mind would probably not be fair to the situation that existed in the country in 1980. Because mind you, before 1980, there has been an attempt to reform the political system in Liberia. It was difficult. You can talk about what PAD tried to do. You can talk about what Moja tried to do for more than 8 years. They were not successful. You can talk about 1979 demonstration, because the trouble even had to bring in foreign troops. So it's difficult for me to more or less just give a definitive answer. But if I can answer this, I will tell you, given where we are now, I would say it was not necessary. But if you had asked me this question in 1980, I would say it was justified.
Thank you. Michael.
All we have to go by really is where we are right now. And where we are right now, my answer would be no, absolutely not. It wasn't necessary. Not only do I believe that by now we could have achieved all we have achieved, I believe we could have gone a lot further with a lot less destruction, a lot less death. We've seen the world evolve really, really fast. We've seen the influence of people and what a mass group of people can influence, and and just looking at how far we've gone backwards, even with the few steps that we've come forward, I will conclude that no, it was not necessary. It was not necessary. But you asked two questions. Your first question was it necessary? Absolutely not. The second question that you asked was, were the problems the coup came to address actually exist? Yes, there were problems. There was a systemic problem of inequality in our midst, on different layers, and it existed even amongst the different ethnicity. There were inequalities, and it existed, and it was deeply seated, and it needed to be eroded. So yes, it existed. Unfortunately, we see that those things still exist. They just exist now in a different form. But yes, so that would be my answer.
Thank you. Dr. Gay.
Yes. The first part of the question, was the coup necessary? No. Second part of the question, what has changed, or what are the problems still there? Yes, the problems are still there.
No, is the problem the coup came to at that time, were there problems, the problem that the coup came to get rid of, did those problems exist at that time?
The problem existed partially. What do I mean partially? 1980, 1979, or 1980 national budget was $350 million of a population of 1.1 million. 1975, William Tolbert, for the first time in Liberia history, went at all concessionary companies in Liberia, multinational companies. For the first time in Liberia history, Firestone was audited to say, pay back taxes you owe the Liberian people. Mind you, Firestone was the company that forced Marcus Garvey's hand. So for the first time under Tolbert, Firestone paid back taxes owed the Liberian people. All concessionary companies were audited for the first time in Liberia history. So what happened in 1980? 1980, for the first time, our national budget for a population of 1.1 million had $350 million to our national budget. Into this money, that would be $1.2 billion. Now, tell me, I'm hearing people say, for the first time, the national budget is more than $780 million. I rest for now on that note.
Ms. Washington?
Okay. Yeah. So the first question, was the coup necessary? And I said no. I believe that the coup was not necessary because while I also agree that there were some systemic inequalities, but nations evolve, countries evolve, people evolve. Even this great United States that we're in, this Western democracy that we love to follow, that we want to emulate, they have evolved over the years. The problems that the United States and other great nations had before, you can see how they've evolved over time with time, with proper a system, with proper training of the population and whatsoever. So no nation is stagnant. So Liberia was evolving. The process might have seemed slow to some people, but the wheels of change were already turning. So the coup was completely unnecessary. Now, the problem for which the coup allegedly took place exists. And I would say, yes, some of the problems existed. But then again, I think that the problems and some of those problems were intentionally or amplified so that it could provide justification for the reasons why those who wanted the change could affect the change. So yes, we did have some issues there, and I think one of the main issues we had was this thing of classism. It was a class system, elitism. I grew up in Monrovia, and I went to all private schools. I went to the St. Teresa's Convent from kindergarten all the way. We were the poor children in school, and I consider my family and my background as middle class. We originated from Bomi County. We also mixed with some settlers, on different sides of my family. But we could see, even though we had a little bit, we were a little bit a step maybe better off, a little bit economically from some of the people that we saw, like on the old road. The old road is a place that is filled with zinc shacks and all of that. So we grew up, struggling in between the middle class and also the lower class. So yes, we could see some of the inequalities, but for me, it was more of an elitist problem than it was actually an intentional problem to keep people at the poverty level the way it was presented to the public and the way it was, I think, intentionally amplified. So to answer that second question, yes, there were some issues. The coup didn't happen in isolation. We can't joke about that. There were some issues, but I think those issues were, some of them were specifically and intentionally amplified for the purpose for which the coup and other, insurrections took place in the country. And then also, and I think, some of the rhetorics that were used by the change agents and some of the things that happened completely just turned everything upside down. So the coup was unnecessary. And yes, some of the things existed, but some of it was just completely, some made up and some amplified.
Yeah, Dennis, if I may just interject,
sure.
Because I think I'm not too sure I followed the second part of your question. I was just mostly concentrating on whether it was justified, and I think my answer, in part, was based on looking back where we are now. But like I said, if you asked me in 1980 whether it was necessary, I would have said yes, it was necessary. And some of the issues, let us not pretend about that. For example, take the 1979 mayoral election that Dr. Sawyer was going to participate in, and that didn't take place for other reasons. But it sooner or later occurred to the students that largely young people who have carried Sawyer to participate in the election, they sooner realized that they were not even citizens, in quotation, of Liberia, because they could not vote. Some of them were in their 40s, they didn't have property. As recent as 1980, if you're not a property owner of Liberia, you're technically not a citizen. You could not vote in your own country. It was a fundamental issue. This one of the issues that the coup addressed. After the coup, everybody, once you obtain the age of 18, you can vote. For example, let us not also pretend education was one of the commodities the settlers used to exclude as an instrument of exclusion and domination. So education was not readily accessible throughout Liberia. My father was a teacher. You know how he got education? He has to travel from Nimba to St. Christopher in Kakata. And they have to tax each village to send only one person. And nobody wanted to send. In fact, my father had to be sent by another village that didn't have any boy child. Nobody wanted to send that child. And my grandfather has also boys and just, I think, 2 girls. And he was willing to give 2 of his boys to go. One for our village, and my father came to represent the other village. That's how he got education in Kakata. And that's several hours, several days of walking from Nimba to come to Kakata to go to school. They will come and spend 1 month, I think 2 months, then they walk back to the village and spend maybe 3 months, then they'll come back again. So that's how people got education. So let us not pretend about that. I think the system itself was very deliberate as to what they wanted to do and how they were going to do it. If you look at Janetta, there's Dr. Janetta, I've forgotten her name. I wish I had read, I've gone back to her script. There's a video even on YouTube by this lady. She went to Liberia, I believe, in the 60s. Her husband was then a research fellow of economics, and they were doing some research in Liberia. And she did a presentation on that. She's Dr. Janetta Coup. Anybody can check her on YouTube, Dr. Janetta Coup. And she said what she saw in Liberia for the first time, she's an African-American lady. She said she has never seen such a class system, even in the United States. She said the settlers reinvented the worst dehumanizing class system in Liberia. That she shared her experience that she would be sitting down. She was sitting down with her settlers, and they had to call a native that was in the home to come, a cup that was just a drink cup, glass sitting next to that person, to come and ask and give me this glass. Would drink the water and probably waste it the person. I mean, there was a bad system. But my point, my argument, and the reason why I started with not being justified is not because the change itself was not managed. And
right, and we'll come to that point.
go into the details on why the change went, why it went. But I will stop there.
We'll come to that point. And my question to Dr. Gay, Massa, and Michael is I interview a couple of historians, and they always caution me not to read history backwards. So if you look and say the coup was not necessary, are you talking as of today? If you were to go back in history, 1980, April 10, what would you say about the necessity of the coup? Michael, just 30 seconds each.
Well, it's hard to erase everything I know right now.
Yeah, I know.
It's very hard to erase. It's hard to erase what I know right now. It's hard to erase 1990. It's hard to erase 1985. It's hard to erase 1982. There's a lot to erase to get back to 1980, April 10 or April 14. 1980. I will say though. I will say. Even with the uncertainty after April 12, 1980, there was a sense of hope. Let me put it that way. There was a sense of hope that Liberia would turn a new leaf. But, this is something that we have experienced throughout, in our last 40 years, we have experienced, that have successively let us down. But anyway, there was a sense of hope.
Right. Dr. Gay, not reading history backwards, what would you say?
Oh, I would tell you up front that what we saw in our country was not an issue of forcing the change. It was not necessary, because if not to read history backward, is as since Massa rightly stated, changes don't come overnight. Read the 1972 Executive Act. That was a law of the land that stated that every ethnic group must be in every ministry. That was a law passed. The same law stated that the president could not make more than $30,000 a year. That was a law of the land. That law only needed to be read back and forth every day, so that the ordinary young men and women, native sons, American Liberians could know that was the law, because if it will be a nation, it must be a nation of law. Change don't come overnight.
Thank you.
Well,
Ms. Washington, you want to ask for 1 minute?
Yes, sure.
If I may ask Dr. Gay, if it is permissible, will you say that law, the executive law you're talking about, who was in charge to implement that? You can say it was the young native activists, though, or the activists of the change. They were not the one in charge to implement that. Will you say who was going to be reading this law every day when they go to work?
As much as I want to answer, I want to also be fair to the host. So since Massa can give a view, and then I can come back to you, if that's fair enough.
Okay, so Dennis, from the moment the coup took place, I was of the opinion that it was unnecessary.
Okay.
And maybe it was because of my background and my family. Or when I say my family, because maybe my family was a bit enlightened, and because we had read a lot too, and members of my family, I was young, but members of my family had traveled, and my father was a Pan-African.
Let me does that presuppose that those who say was
No.
were not enlightened?
Well, it depends, because honestly, let's look at Liberians rushing on the street to jubilate. Go back now and do a survey. They will all tell you that, they thought it was going to be good. They didn't know what they were doing. Let me tell you something. Whether we like it or not, Liberia has had an issue with illiteracy for a long time. And when people are not necessarily enlightened, not necessarily educated, because our people who were in the interior, like, the native people, they govern themselves, and they govern themselves well, and they didn't have formal education. So there's a difference between having a formal education and the difference between being enlightened. Being enlightened simply means that you understand the issue, you have that intelligence because you have been exposed, you have had the opportunity to have had some experience, whether through other people's experience and other people's narrative or not. So we, the majority of our people didn't have that experience. Like I said, I come from a background where my family was more enlightened.
Let me be clear.
The morning when the coup took place, my father came out and said, nobody rejoiced because the soldiers are going to take this country 100 years backward. My late father said it, and we saw it happen.
Thank you. Let's go to our next question here. So, because there's after the coup in 1990, we had war for over a decade. So really, what sometimes we all understand that right now the country is in a bad state. Things have deteriorated. Is it because of the war, which is from 1989 to 2003, to be blamed largely for the backwardness of the country, or is it the 1980 coup? Let me start with Dr. Gay.
Thank you. Yeah, Professor Ganglo, your question fall in line with this. I believe in evolution of a society. No one comes to the book knowing how to read, the blank slate. So we know that for the first time, that's why I love history and I love narrative history. 1972 became a big change. For the first time in our history since 1871, since 1882, we now had we had a multi-party democracy on the top of it. Power. It was not perfect, but this man in his first term wanted to make sure the political space had been opened up to others. And who were taking advantage of it? Since Master just made it clear, young men and women who read were able to force the issue of education at a center stage. Now, sometimes having education does not mean you are fully liberated. That is why I love one of my favorite philosophers, Bernard Lonergan. He talks about the 5 stages of intellect, of insight. That first stage, we were stuck, the Bacchus Mafia was still stuck in stage 1, the basic reading, and that was it for them. Moving forward, where intellect is now being honed did not take place in our country. So again, there's a graduation of how we evolve as a people. That was where the problem started. The agitation, and there's nothing wrong with agitation because I too, I am an advocate, and also I love to provoke conversation. So it was just a matter of time, graduation, so we can move to that level so that our society could have evolved in the right direction. It didn't happen in Liberia.
And so the question here is, the way we see things now, the country is destroyed, we backward, things are very bad, right? Is it because of 1980 or is it because of the 89 to 2003 war? That was my question, Dr.
1980, the agitators were a group of people still stuck in Bernard Lonergan stage 1.
Right.
They could read and write. They saw another part of the world around them, but they didn't understand that to get to that part, it needed a constant approach.
Right. So the question here is it the 1980 coup?
1980 coup.
Compare that to the war of 13 years. Which one did the most damage?
Oh, now the war 1990, it was physical now. Then we were going for everything. We're not just going for the door. We're going for the kitchen, for everybody. So that's what I would just leave it on that level. We were going for everything. It was physical damage, like we see now the war in Ukraine. It was physical. It was brutal. It was about the might is right.
So you're saying 80 caused more damage than the war?
No, 80 was the top was removed. So it was removed. So 1990 was a full damage. I cannot exclude it. It's not if or all. It is the process, because I love to tell narrative based on what happened. So what precipitated it. So I cannot separate it. It was already damaged. But 1990 was what we expected. As Sis Washington just said, but Dad saw this vision that it was going to be an all hell break loose.
So let me continue with you before I go to Michael. So if the war has not taken place, if we had stayed with the coup alone, and we had Doe, right? Who knows what was going to happen next? Maybe another election or a dictator or what have you. Will the country be where it is today?
If we had a coup without the 1990 war,
Yes.
it was not going to happen. That was just a mess. It almost like you made that poor grade from the beginning. You made that 0, and you want to make 100. You're still going to get 50.
Thank you.
Yes.
Ms. Washington.
Yes, sir. So let me just say this. 1980 was actually the precursor of the 1990 or 1989 December 24th Civil War. Without 1980, I don't think Liberia would have gone to war, or maybe at least not in our time. 1980 created the necessary conditions and the element for Liberia to have gone to war, because 1980 was the mother of all. It was when you would say the Pandora box was let open, where every evil thing that people could think about and get away with it happened. So when you look at the era of the coup, and you look at the events that happened, all of the gross human rights violations. So when people realize that, those kinds of things could happen if they had ultimate power and nothing would happen, and then people just consistently look how Doe wiped his colleagues out. Forget about the victims of the 1980 coup, the people from the TWP and the Turbo administration. But look how he wiped out his colleagues. Okay, the majority of them who from history has taught us now, and the facts floating around in our society now has taught us that all those charges against them, like the Coup and what his name was sent, and all those people, it was all bogus to get rid of them. So the stage was set from 1980 all the way to the 9 years or 10 years of Doe administration for the war. And especially when you have a president who sits down, so you have a rebel incursion in one county. And the solution, or the way the president addresses that, is that he comes on state radio and he says, you tell your children in Nima County, your mothers and father are warning you, you tell your children in Nima County, if any bush shake, we'll go there and we'll eliminate Nima County from the map of Liberia.
Right.
But he could only say that because it was the environment with which, the country had been surviving based upon previous events of violence that they got away with, the culture of impunity. So 1980, I believe the war would not have happened without 1980. 1980 was a precursor for the war.
Thank you. Let me ask you this. You said, Liberia was going through evolution. Or let me ask you, then what caused 1980? Because you said Liberia was evolving. Could we not say the same thing from 1980, that things were even going to go for the better? And someone may cite the 1985 first multi-party election. So you were saying, in one breath, you are saying changes were going to come gradually. So the coup was not necessary. But you are saying the 1990 war was almost necessary, was bound to happen. In other words, it was necessary because 80 had already happened. How do you reconcile that?
Okay, what I'm trying to say is that you had the 1980 was also part of this evolution that we talk about. Unfortunately, it was a step out of the orderliness with which the evolution of Liberia was, the trajectory with which the evolution of Liberia was on. 1980 was a complete radical shift from it. So it's like you're driving straight, and then all of a sudden it's a deep curve, and then you're forced to to bend your wheels. That's what I'm talking about. Because let me just say this: change was inevitable in Liberia. Okay, and I believe in change. I don't think it's a good thing for one group of people or for one party to just have control of the entire country forever and ever, more than 100 years. So change was happening. We could see it, we could feel it. But the important thing was the way nations evolve is that when change happened in a systematic and organized manner, the radicalism with it is not so deep, because every time you have a radical change, it is negative. Every time you have a over-the-top dramatic change, it is negative, and this is what happened. So Liberia was definitely going to change. The TWP was going to get out. Probably by now, the TWP would not have even been in power because there were other. And let me just make this point. I'm one of those who do not believe that Barker Matthew brought multi-party democracy to Liberia. What I think is that he enhanced it with the advocacy, because you had, even from within the TWP in the early days of our foundation, our nation's history, you had E.J. Rowe who came up with his independent True Party. Okay, you had E.J. Rowe who came up with an independent True Party. You had the D2 who also came up with a party. So there were attempts along the way to introduce multi-party or democracy. So Barker Matthew did not introduce multi-party democracy. What he did was he built upon it and he took it to the next level. I just wanted to make that clear. And let me just say something to what Kilubo said earlier. Kilubo talked about the voting, that people didn't have voting rights or whatsoever. I've voted for the first time in 1985. I didn't vote other years because I was not old enough to vote. The 70s, he talked about 1978, 1979, 1980. I was not old enough to vote. That's why I didn't vote. The Constitution of Liberia, the 1847 Constitution that was declared not a void. The age to vote was 18 years old because that was the official age of consent. So I don't know any part, again, maybe Kilubo can throw more light on it, but I don't know any part of the 1847 Constitution that Liberians up to 1980, Liberians did not have the right to vote. I've never seen it anywhere there. Okay, but I know the voting age was officially 18, and a lot of us couldn't vote because we were too young to vote. The first time I voted was 1985. So I just wanted to make that clear.
But do you remember
administration intentionally stop people from voting because they were native or because they were
so Ms. Washington, quickly, do you remember the election that President Tubber took? There was an election during the Tubber's time, right?
Yeah.
Do you remember who was his opponent to President Tubber? Dr. Gay, you can help.
He ran unopposed. Why? Because that was a system, and it was not unique to Liberia. Want to add that. Yeah.
Let me go to Mr. Padmo. Same question about the word of.
But Dennis, before you move to Mr. Padmo, I just want to let Massa know that he can read. You can reference. I read this from Dr. Sawyer, some of his tracts when I was at the university. The supporters of Sawyer in 1979, that was one of the handicaps they suffered. When the large state university students could not register to vote, okay? Even though the election didn't take place, but registration for voters started. And when they tried to register, they were not property owners. They were not paying, they were not taxpayers. They could not.
Thank you. In fact, the election was canceled.
Mr. Jack, can I interrupt? Can I interject in what Professor Gonglo just said?
Mm-hmm.
That tragedy of the mayoral election, which actually became law in 1854 by John Lewis as the Speaker of the House, the father. We're interested to note that the same situation today is happening. Here we have a situation today. We do not know the demarcation of Monrovia. Monrovia population is now it is now West Point. It is not Bushra Island. It is not beyond Congo Town.
Sure.
These are issues we need to deal with. That is why, since Massa, I will keep referencing her. Evolution matters. We have to train people to come into the fold so that there will be.
What's your point, Dr. Gay, about the voters? What's the point there?
1979, Monrovia was just Central Monrovia. That was the population for the mayoral election. It was
the election didn't take place.
Why? Because that was the one that won the contention. Who were eligible to vote in the election of 1979?
But it was the property owner clause.
It was beyond that.
All right. Let's let us not digress. Let me go to Michael. Michael, could the 1989 to 2003 war, could it have been prevented? Or was it bound to happen because of 1980? Let's start from there.
Okay.
Answer the general question.
Yeah, I believe that once 1980 happened, I don't see the difference between the two. Like history will tell you about World War I and World War II. Historians will tell you it was one war. It was just a break in between. That's how I see 1980 and 1989. It was all one. It was just a continuous event that built up to 1989, and then the explosion off the top.
Mr. Palmer, let me interject there.
Yeah.
1989 was a revenge of 1980. So when you say they were just one, how do you?
No, I don't believe 1989 was a revenge of 1980.
When the coup plotters, when the invaders announced through Tom Mboweyu in Sierra Leone, he said the war has come to avenge the 13 men that were killed, and it was going to last for 13 years.
If that was said by Tom Mboweyu, I believe that was a play, political ploy. I don't believe that was the case.
Okay.
Dennis, can I say something? Can I say something to that very briefly, Dennis?
I believe it is common. I believe it is common knowledge that if Nima Kante had not been ostracized by that present government, 1989 would not have been possible. It had nothing to do with 1980 at all. So but people have been known to use political ploys to their advantage, even as far back as 1979 in the rights riot, and before then, on our people on our people educational level, for their own selfish political gain. So
Dennis, can I please say something to what Michael is saying? Please, I'll make it very brief.
Please.
Dennis?
Yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned that Tom Mboweyu said on the radio interview that the 1990 war was to avenge what happened in 1980. The coup and the 13 people were executed. Well, I would just say it's just one of those bull wrecking shenanigan talk that people that Mboweyu and the rest of them were throwing around. But don't forget Charles Taylor himself. When Charles Taylor launched a war, and when he was in the hinterland in Liberia, in Compton, he was interviewed by Mac Hubern, the United States journalist who went by way of the Ivory Coast, Danane, and interviewed Charles Taylor. In fact, it was the first one-on-one Western interview that Taylor got from any Western media, and we followed it very closely. In that Mike Hubern interview, when he asked Taylor, what was this about? What was it for? Taylor said, we are a continuation of 1985.
Right.
Samuel Doe stole the election from Jackson Doe from Nima County, and he killed Kuwankpa. In fact, this is why it is named the National Patriotic Forces of Liberia, because when Kuwankpa came with the Butterfield coup, he announced that it was the National Patriotic Forces. So Charles Taylor, who is the head of the revolution, or who was the head of the revolution, said that was a continuation of 1985, and his forces were in fact the same National Patriotic Forces that Thomas Kuwankpa had launched. So I just want you to know. So Charles Taylor, who was the head of the group, would be more credible than Tom Mboweyu.
Charles Taylor also lied, but hold on, Gonglo. Charles Taylor also, in that, because if we go back to 1985 invasion was not because of a stolen election. If we have to set that record straight as well.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I know that because the election was October 15 and the coup was November 12. Nobody planned coup within less than a month. Go ahead, Mr. Gonglo.
Okay, so but before I make my point, let me just clarify something Mr. Palmo said and Jim Asa is alluding to too. You see, the whole thing about how whatever perceived problem emerged between some members of the PRC who came from Nimba, between President Doe, was the basis of 1989. I think I don't think I want to buy that. I don't think it's on a solid ground, because there were democratic forces in Liberia, and Massa, as a journalist, is quite aware of that. Democratic forces were fighting for change, that the military regime would not stay in power. In fact, the first group of exile Liberian progressive who left was Dr. Amos Sawyer and Kwame Wise. not Dr. Amos, Dr. Tipote.
Yeah,
He was the first official of the PRC who went into exile. I don't know if any of you recall that.
Yes, I do.
1980, I think as early as 1981, he left the country and communists are following because these folks have fought for change. And sooner or later, they realized that the military was not up for the change they wanted for the country. And there was a fallout. And they were not falling out with President Doe and folding their legs. President Doe has to even ban student politics on the campuses of the University of Liberia. And in fact, they banned student politics as well. And there were struggles within the country for participation. Though Dr. Sawyer has to be jailed, accused of plotting the overthrow. So all these things are happening and has nothing to do with Nimba County. Whether Doe and Coup have fallen apart or not, there would have been a definite change. When Bacchus Matthew spoke in 1987 at the Chamber of Commerce at the press club, I was there. I was sitting on the front row. And he said, if there is an insurrection, the election of 1991 will not be held. And there was demonstration across the country condemning Bacchus. Okay? There was a reason why he said that. Because it was just too obvious. Whether Dr. Famula would have probably led another group against Doe. Joe Wally would have led a group against Doe. And when I checked, these people are not from Nimba. Okay? So let us not whitewash or maybe massage what is obvious. But I'd like to go back to the main discussion we're on. Okay? I think
and here's the question. Is it the 89 war largely to blame, or is it the coup of 1980 for the backwardness of Liberia today?
Yeah, I think there are key things Dr. Ogay and Massa and Mr. Palmo have said, and I just smile. You see, I will tell you this. Is if you look at Liberian history, there are different events in the history of Liberia that we can say these were catalytic events. They were actually preparing Liberia for a bigger or evil. And it definitely happened. 1979, it was one of the events. The many arrest of Abba Poach was part of the event. The issue of the David Coleman detour. You can go from the Fumbler, you can go into history. And these different events will be on a small scale, where, in a way, a catalytic event preparing Liberia for, if Liberia didn't change, something bigger will happen. So, but the reason why some of us, when we reflect in retrospect, we say, well, maybe the coup was not necessary at this point, is not because there was not justifiable reason for a radical change, a radical takeover of the system. There was certainly a justifiable a reason to do so, but because it was not managed and it was not led by change agent. So that's why, in retrospect, we say, well, these people who did the thing were just more or less people who benefited from the series of catalytic events. But the key thing we should not lose sight on is education. Access to education was weaponized by the establishment. And this came to bite the country. And Liberia is a victim in a very aggressive exclusionary system, class system, that education was used as a weapon. And Massa, Mr. Palmo, Mr. Gay, Dr. Gay, they all alluded to lack of illiteracy. But who made the country largely illiterate? The settlers. The settlers, they weaponized education. And that's the fact. That's the fact. They weaponized education. And it is the one that is the single most issue that is troubling Liberia today. You take whatever government you put there, the quality of education, even before 1980, was not any better compared to other countries, given the resources in Liberia. I went to Catholic school. I can boast that, yes, I went to a good school. I was taught by all white people, but I'm not talking about myself. I'm talking about millions of Liberians in the villages, where all around Liberia, we who grew up in the villages, we didn't have access to education. if I tell you, some of you, my story, I'm a Liberian. The resources of Liberia belongs to all of us. And you have a group of people who are using the resources. I went to school under a palaver hall. We have to use charcoal for the first time to write. And the teacher, when one class go under the palaver hall, when he finish ABC, you have to wet a bowl with wet cloth and put it in the sun and dry, then the other group go. So we have one teacher. But we're all Liberians. Let us not pretend about that. The system education was weaponized. And that is, for me, the fundamental issue. The illiteracy challenge we have in the country today was an investment that the power that be made, and Liberia is reaping as a country from that investment up to today.
No, I completely disagree, Dennis.
Okay.
And before you disagree, let me add something on top of it, because we all saw that, and I like how Mr. Gonglo put it, that there were other events that preceded. So we look at how Tubman successfully clamped down on any, political or opposition, right? We look at D2, he paraded the opposition naked. We look at the senior family, the lies, or the fake coup with Coleman. When we say these things too kind of give rise to 1980 the same way those events from 1980 give rise to 1989, or those were all part of the evolution? You can answer that and then go to what Gonglo said.
Okay, so Dennis, all of those things that you have cataloged are all part of the imperfection that some of us talk about when we say the system had problem and everything was not done right. So what Kilobo is trying to describe when he says the settlers weaponized education against the native, I want to disagree with that.
Access to education.
Yeah, but you said the weaponized education.
Access to education.
You said the weaponized. Okay, but it's still education. So they weaponize access to education. Now, when you say that, Kilobo, it sounds deliberate to me. And all through, except I'm reading different aspects of history, and except I'm talking to different categories of Liberian, and I would say I pride myself for being a middle level person. I always like to reach across the aisle. So I disagree that the settlers intentionally weaponized the access to education so that our native brothers and sisters will not have the opportunity of being educated. I come from Bomi County myself. My grandfather was not educated, but my uncles and my aunts and stuff, they went to school. So I also come from that background as well. Never mind my affluence today. Okay, so I disagree there. And what Kilobo is trying to describe to me is like he will be trying to describe a utopia state and existence which doesn't exist anyway. Because even in this great United States, go down south, they still got dirt road, they still got outhouse. You know what they call outhouse? In Liberia, in Africa, we call it osatore. They still got it in this United States of America. When I came, I was shocked. My first experience with homelessness, I went to Central Park because I wanted to tour Central Park. I was shocked to see a homeless man. I gave him food to eat. So we didn't have a perfect system. I'm not making excuses for people. After 100-something years, it could have been better. But my point is, we were getting there. We were getting there, and the coup, the events of the coup and the war just completely destroyed everything. Listen, in other countries like Ghana, Rwanda, and other countries, okay, even when they had the change and when they had the turbulent changes, they didn't completely destroy everything. They built upon what their predecessors left. But this a rhetoric of hatred that we preach. So people just came and destroy everything, destroy all the system. I know.
Let me start with.
Huh?
How do you refute what Calebo said, that they weaponized the access to education? Is your defense is because in America too, not everywhere is people have access? Is that the
that's not. I'm just trying to make comparison because these are the places that we like to compare Liberia with.
Right. So what's your defense that didn't happen?
No, Dennis, what I'm trying to say is that his explanation sounds like he wanted Liberia to be a utopian state at the time, and it's not possible. Utopia is an imaginary perfect world. It's not possible. Liberia was not going to be possible.
Give me instances how education was
perfect 100 years from now. But what I'm saying is, when he says that the settlers intentionally weaponized the access to education. I think that is like cutting it too deep. If Kilebo says, all of Liberia did not have, access to education or adequate education, I would join him because that's a true statement. But when he said the intentional, you see, let's be careful with words and rhetorics. And these were some of the things that blew Liberia, into turmoil, the rhetorics and the words. Sometimes you mean something, but then you use other fiery words that people, the first time I heard petit bourgeoisie to describe, middle class Liberians whose parents were working hard and who could afford color TV and stuff. So when Kilebo said the secular's intention, is that word intentional? No, Kilebo, I don't think it was intentional. We are all Liberians in the same country. You might have had a different experience from me, but I don't think it was intentional. So yes, there were some lapses. They could have done better. But what I'm saying is, at the time of the military coup, you could see the progress that was being made towards this change that everybody was looking for. That's why I say the coup is not necessary. I didn't say the coup was not necessary because we didn't have any problem, we didn't have any ills. I would be a complete liar to sit here and say Liberia was perfect and everybody had all the access. It's not true. So yes, I agree with Kilebo some of it, but I disagree when he used strong languages to again create that them versus us rhetoric. We got to try and get away from that now, because that's what got us where we are today.
Mr. John, I beg for a minute of clarification here. I think that's what I do when I get on different Liberian forum. I come on a forum with an open mind, and I like to be truthful with my interpretation of Liberian history. I'm not a historian, but I like to take issue to interpret history because it's a human event. It needs to be interpreted. My reverse question to you or anyone who disagrees, maybe Dr. Gay, who has done extensive research on Liberia, because I actually watched on YouTube on him today, just to know a little more about him. I would say we all talk about illiteracy. We talk about the education as an issue. All of you, not me. You talk about it before I even came in. What would you say by 1979 or even by 1989, if Liberia, if the literacy rate or the illiteracy rate have been low, people have had better education across Liberia, that they knew the value of life pool, they knew the value of public assets, government assets, and what have you. They knew the value of all the stuff. Why do you think would have been the reaction of the devastation that the country experienced? You think it would have been minimized? What would you say?
Can I jump in if that's okay?
Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Gay.
I will talk about Turbert's economic envelope. Money, money, money. Turbert's administration, population of Liberia, 1.1 million. Last budget before his demise, 350 million. Today's money, that will be $1.2 billion. Our current population now today is 5 million, not in a violation of our constitution. Since 2008, we have not counted our population. Think about it. The schools that were built on the Tubman and Turbot are still the very government schools we have today. The multilaterals. Think about them. Who were they built for? They were not built for the Johnsons, the Joneses. They were built in counties so that Mr. Gay, Mr. Flomo, Mr. Gonglo, kiddos who all have the chance to be in the multilaterals. That's the reality of it. Our national envelope was not that large, especially when Turbot came in. That's why I made this statement. It was for the first time in Liberia history that under Turbert's administration, all of the multinational companies that exploited Liberia, that comes to the outside forces, were never audited until Turbot brought it.
Mr. Dr. Gay, let me stop you there. I mean, the country has existed for over 100 years before Turbot. So when you
3 years,
right, so when you kind of slice it to just the few years before 1980, are you discounting those other years, or because those things as per 1980 they were all built up
is very important because guess what? We're talking about the envelope. Now, most of the time people talk about, oh, they should have done this. Do you know how much Liberia had in 1923? We were struggling on the top end. That was for the first time we have the Western world that had destroyed themselves to come and exploit us. We should never forget this fact. Bombing Hills. Since Washington just talk about Bombing Hills, the so-called Blue Lake. Blue Lake was a mountain that became a valley in a pollution. Think about that. It was Tolbert that called our attention because guess what? He understood social justice. And that's why he began to call and say, no, you cannot exploit the people. He was not perfect. And he called our attention that our economic side should be fixed. That is why he opened up the envelope to say we do not need to focus on America for dependency. We need to look at other friends. And while Libya got involved with Liberia to build estates, who are the estates being built for? Our uncles and aunties in Nuku time. They refused to move to New Georgia to Stephen Tower Estate. You know that, Professor Ganglo. They refused. So let us tell this story. I love narrative ethics because in that way, we are able to focus on our people based on their time. And since today is about President Tolbert and the demise of 1980, I want to focus on it. But I will always call you, Brother Jar, focus on our national envelope. Look at the numbers.
I want to look at the impact, but here's my question.
If I may just throw something in.
Before you come in, let me just let Dr. Gay end here. Minus the Civil War, will Liberia be in a better place than where we are today?
In Dubai. I can say that anytime. It will be a Dubai. Read the writing of the basketball star Russell's in his visit to Liberia.
I'm not saying the coup. I said minus the Civil War. With the coup, minus the Civil War, will Liberia be in a better place today? Dr. Gay.
I cannot, all I can say, it will not have. Because you know why? Our rights were being stopped as it was moving forward. When Samuel Doe, the young men and women he sat with and ate with, he ate GB with, he was ready to take the next out. He was ready to take on West End because of international politics that is being played falsely. From watching the march in Grand Bassa County on his way back will be slaughtered. Liberia will never been a better place.
You can't even call Doe a flag, man.
I love it. You know what? You know my dad was Doe's.
Right, because what you are saying is like every other president, they were doing something better. But when it came to Doe, war. So do you still say today that another war is bound to happen because of what's going on?
The level of corruption we see, the two kind of corruption, administrative corruption based on the 1972 laws and the economic corruption, we are bound to make the same terrible mistake. I pray there should be no war. I pray for justice so that those who steal from our country can be placed in jail soon.
Thank you. Mr. Padmo, same question. Minus the Civil War, with the coup now, minus the Civil War, will Liberia be in a better place than where we are today?
Than where we are today?
Yeah.
Yes. Because we are so far down. It doesn't mean we would have kept going up. We just wouldn't be this far down.
Thank you.
Know, 350,000 Liberians wouldn't have lost their lives. We wouldn't have burned everything down. We probably would still have electricity in Monrovia, running water. So we will be a little bit better, but we wouldn't be where we are supposed to be.
Thank you.
So yes, but I wanted to make this point.
Yeah, sure.
Because to Honorable Gonglo there, I know we have this propensity to personalize things, to look at things through a simple lens. And he made a statement concerning, I believe it was his father, who he stated that was privileged to attend school in Kakata, even though he was from Nimba. But I just want to point out to him. I've met a lot of people from Nimba that went to Ganta Methodist School. Ganta Methodist School opened in 1926. And it took in a lot of people from Nimba and educated them. And your father had to go to Kakata. So maybe that's a personal experience for you. But you speak to other people from Nimba, they'll tell you, oh, no. My uncle went to Ganta Methodist. You know, so I just wanted to point that out. That not everybody in Nima that went to school had to walk to Kakata to go to school. I just wanted to point that out to you, Chief, so that you
Mr.
know.
Bungalow, was it a public school in
No.
Kakata?
Let me just correct Mr. Palmer.
Uh-huh.
When Gantam Methodist Mission was established,
Mm-hmm.
they didn't start with education. They started with hospital. What they did, they took in people like nurse aid. They were just training nurse aid, people who work in the system, at the hospital. They were not running education system like as such, because that was not their focus. They were just a doctor and his wife. So the focus was basically training people. In fact, it may interest you. When my father left St. Christopher in Kagata, he was working at Gandhi Methodist as a nurse. I don't want to go into that story because he was given scholarship. He would travel to London along with Dr. Toy, and for other reasons he didn't go, and he has to join education system and started teaching. But that was the focus. Don't mix the two. They were training.
And I want to also mention public school and private school. Like in my part of the world, it was the missionaries that came and settled there. So minus the missionary, I will become a medicine man today. So the government really did not pay attention to other parts of the country, especially those of us who were born behind God's back. Personally, I was born behind the house on plantain leaf, and I have to cross 4 creeks to get to the nearest school. So government did not really do well for us. It was the missionaries, and in most part of Liberia, we had a missionary. But here's another question I want to ask before we bring in our comments. Most of us we talk about the coup, right? Is the issue with the coup because it did not produce the intended result? Most of the time or is it because yes, the coup was bad, but had the coup produced some good results? Like most Liberians talk about Jerry Rawlings. So had Doe or the PRC been like Jerry Rawlings to turn things around for the better, will we be talking the same thing, or is it because the coup did not correct what it was intended to correct? And to add to that, because there are other coups taking place, so is it like the ends justify the mean kind of thing, or
Dennis?
Yeah.
Can the long lady amongst you illustrious guys say something?
No, Master, you can play that card because you've been saying something.
Look at Kilebo looking at me like
Let Master talk. I like to listen to what.
Hey, Kilebo, don't mind the people. I didn't know we family with my man. Don't mind it.
No. I like to hear your view on this question. I know.
Okay, Dennis, I'm answering that question, but let me just say quickly. You went to school in Dowenken, right? Your place okay. So I love that village or that town so much, the way you have promoted. You take me there one day, but you are saying that it was not the government that helped or provided that opportunity for you to have gotten that education. It was a missionary and expatriate. But don't forget, all of those people were all partners and collaborating partners of government. Even as we speak, we have NGOs all over the place from the inception of Liberia. In every country, it's not only Liberia, every country got the private schools, these NGOs, these missionaries, but they are all under the auspices of government. They don't just come out of isolation, come from America or Sweden or the Netherlands and come and build a mission in Dowenken or whatsoever. No, they are there because they have discussed with government. Most of the time, government have sought their assistance to please come and help provide education to our people because we ain't able to do it. We are limited. So Dennis, all those missionaries and stuff that were over there, they were all part of the bigger picture of the educational system of government. They were not in isolation. So Dennis, you'll be fair to the government. They tried. Yeah. So what was your question again?
Let me be careful now.
Your question again, Dennis.
I'll come to the question. But if we want to credit the government for that thing, then today we should be crediting the current government. If we have mission school, we shouldn't slice and dice it based on who is in power. I just want to make that clear.
No, I mean that's
the question.
Fair enough. But that's fair enough. But yes, there is no comparison comparing to the degradation of the educational system now. So even with
Yes,
all those
because private
NGO and
schools,
stuff, it's not
private
the same
schools
as
are
yesterday. It's not the
private
same
schools
as
are
yesterday.
all over the place, but these are people for their own private. Some are using it for business, but you are saying the government is partnering with them. So I take that. But the question here is the whole thing with the coup. Is it because the coup did not really bring about the change that it was supposed to bring? Is that why we talk about it that way? Because other places where, for instance, Jerry John Rawlings, that most Liberians make, reference to, things were bad as well. Or the Americans coming here and the way they treated the Indians, very bad, even worse than any country have done to any group of people. But because of what we have now, maybe we don't speak so ill of it. Is that the same thing with the coup of 1980?
Well, I will give you a two-part question to that. The first part is we can never erase the horrible, horrific matters of the coup. The coup was completely unnecessary to me. Tomorrow, you wake me up day after tomorrow. If I'm 80 years old, you ask me that question, I will still say the coup was completely unnecessary. But notwithstanding, as unnecessary as the coup was, however, if they had done some things right, that would have not led us to war, that would have not ushered in all those horrific, gross human rights violations, that would have, like you mentioned, J.J. Rawlings, that would have turned Liberia around on the path of irresistible, or progress. Then people would not have forgotten that the coup was unnecessary, but they would quicker live with what is happening now because you know what? Well, the coup was unnecessary. All these bad things happen, but at least we are hopeful for the future because the country is on the right, on the right course. But none of it happened. So the coup was unnecessary, and then it didn't achieve the quote unquote revolution. Didn't achieve what it set out to achieve. So that was double whammy.
Thank you. Mr. Gonglo, same question. Had the coup produced good result and we are, moreover, is like Kigali, will we be saying the same thing today?
No, I mean, Dennis, man by nature loves success. We usually say success has many fathers and many mothers. If the guys were successful, if they have turned Liberia into Dubai, like Dr. Gay was talking about, if Tower had been, we'll be talking about the success of the Second Republic. Because the First Republic ended, we'll be talking about the changes the Second Republic brought to Liberia. That will be the story. That will be the narrative we'll be passing around. But unfortunately, that was not led by change agents. These folks themselves didn't believe in things that Michael Matthews, Dr. Tipote, Dr. Sawyer, Dr. Fumble, the things that these guys are talking about, like Dr. Sawyer, was mostly concentrated on individual rights. That's why even the Constitution drafting committee, the draft Constitution was heavily giving emphasis on individual rights over, or group rights over state rights. So these were semi-illiterate military guys, who didn't understand what the guys were advocating for. So they benefited from the advocacy and then led the country on the path of destruction. So yes, I would say it will not be an issue today. I'm going to answer no today because I was telling you in hindsight, knowing what I know now. But if you were positive, we all would have embraced it. But let me just also add this before you move to another.
30 seconds.
Let me just add this. It boils down to the education debate we have in other countries. If you go to Ghana, today people are getting master's degree in the state of Nkrumah, philosophy. People are getting PhD. If we had Liberian that we believe that we can rely on and say this is an icon who fought for the good of Liberia, this was a person dream for the nation. This is what the person stood for. Today, even the military guys, some of the changes have come over time. They would have been referencing that. Today, every Ghanaian scholar, every Ghanaian politician want to be known as an ally of Nkrumah. Someone who believe in Nkrumah dream, or who don't have that icon in Liberia. It boils down to the fact that we have no old mat to plant the new mat on in Liberia. So this is the issue. Is because access to education and the quality of education was questionable.
Thank you. Dr. Gay, sometimes Liberians use Rwanda or Ghana. So had the coup produced good results, and moreover was like Kigali, or if Dodrican was like Dubai, will we be talking this today?
No, we'll not be talking this, and that's why it hurts me, and that's why one of the good thing I love narrative ethics and history, because you are able to gaze through the time frame and know who did what, and we can call you for it, than to put a blind or blame or praises on everyone. Here is the issue here. I just told you, 1854, Monrovia became the oldest municipality in Africa by law. The young men who came, very young, they saw the aspiration for the United States. They passed that law so that Monrovia could vote for its own mayor, build its own toll system, and generate its own revolution. I mean, its own revenue. Come forward to the time we're talking about now. We were moving at the precipice of a nation as a beacon of hope. Who came to Liberia under Tubman's administration? The young Kwame Nkrumah. What did he see in Liberia? He saw the port of Monrovia being built. He went to Cary. He saw Firestone. He was so amazed. Guess what he did? Kwame Nkrumah took Liberia's dream to Ghana. Check the video where you see Nkrumah visiting on a boat to Liberia. He saw Liberia as a place to learn a lesson to transpose to his country. Nothing he did was different. He saw it.
Just better.
It was there we go. It was just better.
So what's the point? And the dam was, I mean, things still remain that way until the war came and destroyed them.
Not the war alone. You know, it comes back to Dr. Professor Gonglo. Education matters. The first, sometimes a small group of people, that's why I would always talk about George Orwell's book, Animal Farm. There is always this nature that someone knows so much. The next group should just be taken away. And that's why we did not. Revolution versus evolution. It's an issue we face in Liberia.
Thank you. Let's go to the bigger question today. And the question is, has the April 12, 1980 coup changed Liberia for better or for worse? Let's go around the room 1 minute each. Mr. Padmo.
Has the April 12 coup changed Liberia for better or for worse?
Yes.
For worse.
Why?
Because it started a cascade of events from the disembowelment of the president to the 13 men being put on the poll for rampant corruption to the infighting and to the systematic breakdown of our constitution, our laws, our rights that led to such desperation that when men showed up with guns, other people are willing to take up guns against the national government. So yeah, so it was solely bad, and look where it's led us to now, where we have Zogos in the streets. So yeah, it's been totally horrible for us.
Ms. Washington, has the coup of 1980 changed Liberia for better or for worse?
I think it changed Liberia for worse, but it changed Liberia for worse because, for me, I think the growth of Liberia stopped there. It was done. Yeah. And everything else that was happening, Liberia was only existing after 1980. She was not thriving. And the reason I say that is that, so you had young soldiers and you had ambitious young people from college, with big degrees and stuff, who really didn't have the practical experience for running a country of such diversity. And then, of course, there were some external factors that the Toba administration was dealing with that people don't like to talk about. There was this Cold War and the events of the Cold War and the wind of change sweeping across the entire world, including Europe and Africa. And the Toba administration was dealing with that. there were a lot of behind the scene struggle that they were struggling with at the same time, trying to keep the cohesion, in this small country. And then you have all these young, ideologues and theorists coming out, and they want change, they want it now, they can't wait because they come from school, they're very educated, and they think that it's our time. So all of that happened, and of course, when the coup happened, it just completely stunned the growth of Liberia, because
Yep.
nothing was built upon. Nothing was built upon. It took 10 years for Samuel Doe and his group of people to completely just destroy everything in there in terms of the system. Don't forget, every system. I mean, you have someone who is an 8th grade student, now president of the country, running the country. What does he know about policies? Okay, what does he know about green revolution? What does he know about social revolution? Their idea of a revolution that they were fed was this Marxist, Leninist, or quote unquote socialist idea type of revolution. Piggyback on the French Revolution. What happened in the French Revolution? Oh, we got to wipe all the people off. Introduce, heated rhetorics like petit bourgeoisie to describe middle class. Most of people. So what I'm saying is those were the things that happened in 1980 that stunned the growth of Liberia. And I just want to say quickly to what Kelebo said. He talked about...
Don't say anything. Let me ask you my question. Kelebo will say one thing.
He said, don't say anything. Okay.
So, was there any positive out of the 1980 war? Let's look at the changing of the constitution, the introduction of the multi-party elections that we have today, and then the cutting cutting off that class structure, so that we were all, so the names like Yakpa now were popular. You didn't have to change your name anymore. Did you see anything positive out of the 1980 coup?
Yeah, there was some positive, but they were completely minimal, compared to the damage.
Thank you.
So the damage of the coup compared to the gains were extremely minimal. And let me just correct it. People had different experiences in just one small country with only 45,000 square miles. So when you make the point and say, the Yakpa Wolves, people, they didn't have to change their name. There were some experiences where people voluntarily changed their name to their own family names because, this thing of adoption. Like, for example, my parents...
I didn't say they were forced. People volunteered because of the situation.
My parents came from Bomi County, and I had cousins who, when they came to town to live with us and stuff, they took my father's name. They were not Congo people, or they did not change to my father's name because, they were in this Congo household. They just took my father's name because it was convenient for them, and they love him and they like it. It was like a form of informal adoption. So, we got to give a middle narrative to this thing here.
No, but Masato, you are saying people really didn't change.
People made a very good point about the Nkrumah thing and how Ghanaians, they revere Nkrumah, but with us, he made a point that he says, but we don't have any old mat to sit on. And the reason we don't have any old mat to sit on is because people, those who aspire to the 1980s narrative, just want to completely erase, all the gains and, and some of the good that the settlers did. And
but you are doing the same thing now. You erase everything Doe did on the PRC. I'm not erasing everything Doe did. I did tell you there were some gains, but the gains were completely minimal to the destruction. And destroy. All right.
That's what
Mr. Padman, you wanted that same question.
The destruction.
All right, Mr. Padman, you wanted that same question.
No, just saying you asked me the question now.
Yeah, go ahead, answer that question. 1 minute.
No, she pointed out correctly.
All right.
There were a lot of people that didn't change their name, that never had to change their names, and we saw them among, they were educated, they went to the best schools, they traveled, they went to the US, they got college degree, doctorate degrees, they came back, they worked in the Toba government. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf was at finance when 1980 happened. She should have been on the poll. But she wasn't, and Samuel Jackson worked at Commerce when, right before 1979 rice riot. All these progressives worked in the same government that we speak of, that they condemned later on, they didn't have to change their name. So there's this narrative that, before you progress, you had to change your name. No, it was convenient for some people. Like we see people move to the US today and they change their names. We're conscious of that. When we name our children now, because we give our children certain names because they live in the U.S. We don't want it to be spelling the name everywhere they go. So we try to give them names that confine that adapt to the change. But I just wanted to correct that narrative. That we have.
You're not correct. You just adding your own because the stories are different. Other people had to change their names. Other people didn't have to. Mr. Gonglo.
But Dennis, I just like to interject on Mr. Park.
And that's your turn now. I'm asking.
Yeah, yes.
You got to interject, sir. Just speak.
No.
Just speak,
I think the point needs to be made that I don't think when people struggle for change in the country, they are necessarily saying we can't work in government. In fact, working for your government is a right, it's an obligation, it's a patriotic duty. You can work in the system and challenge the system that I can do this if you are given a chance. Okay, my brother Councillor Gongo is a typical example. He worked with Ellen Johnson Sirleaf at some point and said, "Look, Madam President, I'm done because this is how dictators behave in Africa. You are treading our path. I'm out." Okay, so one can say, they were all in the system. Yes, but he stood up for what he believed in. If Sam Jackson and others were working, I know somebody who worked in the Tower government, but he was also active in power in the Progressive Alliance of Liberia. So I think working for government is not antithetical, to progressive struggle. To say once you're struggling for change, then you can't work for government. No, I think that's erroneous in my judgment.
Thank you. So the big question here is: has the April 12, 1980?
So on the big question, I will hold judgment on this, and here are the reason why I'm going to hold judgment on. The 1980s, some of the cardinal things that the junta laid down was rampant corruption. Corruption was existing under the TWP government. Corruption existed under the junta. Corruption is still in Liberia today. In fact, I would say at astronomical level. So I don't see that as a change. There was corruption and there's corruption. Access to education was very low under the TWP government. Access to education is today much more higher. Your quality is a different judgment. It's a different debate. The quality of education is a different debate. I will also go back to the lack of respect for rule of law. It was under the TWP government. It is still with Liberia today. Nepotism was under the TWP government. It's still an issue today. So now, if you ask me to make a judgment on that, I will hold back on that. I think what I would say in a short phrase would say, a lucha continua. The struggle to make Liberia better still continues. That's what I would say.
Dr. Gay.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, a few things that I want to put up here. You can
answer this question.
Yeah, okay, just ask a question so I can just
Yeah, the question is, has the April 12, 1980 coup changed Liberia for better or for worse?
For worst. Why?
Why?
We claim our root. As native people, let us come to our root. The so-called sons of the soil and daughters of the soil. I despise that statement so much because it doesn't tell the pan-African nature of the only country in Africa that should be making about $2 billion just for claiming its pan-African roots. I say that because I also despise the word settlers. Having said that, let us come to the fact here. We are worse off than we've ever been. We never started well, but the young men and women who left from these United States, the young men that were captured on these high seas of Africa, the Atlantic, called the liberated Africans, as I put them in our book, were brought over to Liberia. The first census conducted in 1843. Half of them were dead. 1,433 survived. And they began to lay out the foundation of a nation. To look in their faces and say their history, we should just put them in this one blanket and say their whole history, they just did the wrong thing. They are settlers, they came to this A, B, and C. We are telling the story of what we too did in terms of the history of slavery is wrong. So we tell the story narrative-wise from generation to generation. And as Tobert generation is the focus of today, will we find justice in their story? Because if we don't find that reconciliation, like since Massa did along with the TRC project, when they visited Chicago, Illinois, with Northwestern University being involved with this very TRC project she pushed, we're not going to go forward. Because you know what reconciliation means? It means accountability. To reconcile a book in accounting is to check the numbers and correct it. Having said that, why can we say that? We must now rethink our nation and rebuild it by knowing those who did wrong and call it as it is. Those who did a little bit, let us call their names. But to go in and say that 1980 should just be scratched off. Think about it today. This horrible crime happened 43 years ago. Nobody had a program in Liberia. The so-called George Weah CDC-led government did a bicentennial program. No one realized that part of history is to know what happened on this day. A solemn reflection of a nation. A nation that does not remember its past is bound to fail. I want to rest on this.
Thank you. Massa, have you answered the question?
Yes, you did.
All right.
Oh, wait now. Who answered for me here?
You are the first. You are the
first. But I was still speaking, Dennis. And when you put a gag, you should gag order on me so that
you wanted to, because we want to have equal time, going around.
Yeah, I know, but I was trying to wrap up, and when you put gag order on me, so I had to respect you, the host. So if you give me my
all right, go ahead. 1 minute to conclude, please.
Okay. So where I am with this whole discussion, with this whole Liberia story, is that I'm like Artemis. I want a narrative, but I want more of a middle point narrative, because when you talk about reconciliation, you got to, it's a compromise, give and take for everybody. Now, Kelubo struck a very cool point when he talked about sitting on the old mat to weave new mat. Right? Kelu said something about the old mat or so, in reference to Ghanaians honoring Nkrumah. But then we don't have anybody in Liberia that we would like to honor. It is unfair, because we have heroes. We had heroes then, and we have heroes emerging now. Like I will tell you straight, Chewon Gonglo is one of those I consider one of the contemporary heroes of Liberia, not because his brother is on this show, but it's because he has shown to us, regardless of everything, he has shown to us, yes, that he's capable, and he's been doing it all. So for me, for our era, Chewon Gonglo is one of the heroes. For me, for that 1980 era, William Tarbell is a hero. This man was a Pan-Africanist. He pushed, he was in the struggle for Pan-African liberation all over the place. Amilcar Cabral, the South Africans all over the place. And even with Liberians and the progressive, he worked with them initially. He tried to understand where they were coming from. He tried to incorporate them. And he was bringing the kind of changes that all of us here would have been so proud of. So for us to sit down now to say, we don't have any heroes, this is what Atimus is saying. We cannot completely erase 1822, 1847 history, same as we cannot erase the history of our native, forefathers who went through some things at the inception of the country. So what I'm saying is, all of us now who are educated, who are fortunate to have been educated, we need to continue this discussion to sit down and find a middle point where everybody's struggle will be heard and validated, and then chart a new course for how we want this new Liberia to be. This is where I am. But for me, I speak very strongly when people think that they're just going to be dismissive of the people, the settlers. I think it's wrong.
Dennis, I think I need to clarify.
Right. And let us also not forget that we want to praise President Tarbell. He was there for 10 years. This was not just 5 years. This was 10 years. He's the second to the third.
He did a lot.
Trotman, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, and President Tarbell. So let us not make it to feel like, he was overthrown maybe in the second or third year. Calabo, please go ahead.
Let me just make this quick clarification. I think when I talk about plotting a new match on the
Let's be brief. We are almost out of time.
Basically referencing how Ghanaian will make reference to Nkrumah philosophy and dream for Ghana, right? So, but if you look, and they don't do this out of the blue. The University of Ghana and different Ghanaian government actually embrace some of the programs that Dr. Nkrumah started when he was president of Ghana, prime minister of Ghana. They started like the Akosomo then, like the policy on massive education. You know, I mean, that's why you have so many Ghanaians educated today. So the University of Liberia and those of you who even are authors like Dr. Gay, who are actually taking time to say, you know what, or even the government. Let's point to President Salif, who worked with Tobo as finance minister under her government. Did she establish even a center in honor of Tobo? The programs they have under Tobo, did she take Tobo policy and say, these were great policy, and I think they are relevant today? But she didn't do that. So who is supposed to make Liberia, for Liberians, ordinary Liberians, to say, we have an icon that we need to learn from? It has to be our leaders to lead that, okay? We've not had that, okay? And let me just end on there.
Yeah, please.
Tobo, we are not discussing Tobo. Tobo as an individual and president, Tobo was a change agent. It may interest you to know that Tobo was a member of Moja. Many people don't know that. He joined, in fact, when Tobo joined Moja, then members of the ruling class, some of them went to join PA. That's how Ellen Johnson said he was member of PA. You know, Chuchu Horton joined Moja. Others started joining the progressive movement because Tobo said, look, the guys are not opposed to us. They are saying things that is for the good of the nation. So Tobo became a charter member of Moja.
And that's where the whole idea of Palace Coup came in, but we're not going to go into that today. That there were elements of the TWP that actually did not like what Tobo was doing, the way he was progressive. And then they were, and let us not forget, also with the what happened in Maryland with Alan Yancey and those people, they were opposed to Tobo. And so, but we're not going to go into all that today. They were talking about heroes, Michael, Mr. Patmo. And I was just curious, in 30 seconds, who's your hero?
My hero has always been Willem Aratoba.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Mr. Cummings. All right, we'll take a short break, and when we come back, we'll read comments from our viewers.
At Focus on Liberia, we discuss everything Liberia, from education to politics, arts and culture, entertainment, agriculture, history, religion, family, and technology. Focus on Liberia uncovers and showcases the best of Liberia and shows the world the truth about Liberia. We educate, elevate, and promote all things Liberia. We conduct interviews, panel discussions, debates, and more. Tune in to Focus on Liberia on Facebook and YouTube and be a part of the stories that make up the news.
This is Focus on Liberia, and I am Dennis Jar.
Welcome back to Focus on Liberia on the 42nd anniversary of the bloody 1980 coup d'etat that took the life of President Tobo and other government and other Liberians, including 13 of his officials. Let's go to our comments now. We're asking, where were you when the coup took place? Gamoyu Zoga was on Old Road Cuba. So Kringa was on the Capital Bypass. Kelawu Flomo, at the time, I lived in Airfield, Lakwasu single, and I was in a 6th grade student. Just before the coup, I was a newspaper vendor, something I started doing since the OAU in 1979. Abitala, I was in Bannersville Estate. I was too young to understand what was going on. 2 days later, a group of soldiers barged into our house and held us at gunpoint as they rummaged through my mother's belongings. She was in the police and had worked her way up. I'll never forget the fear and kept reciting the 23rd Psalms. They left only to return again in 1985 and repeat the same act. Thank God we are alive. Talking about whether the coup was necessary, Eugene Hammer said the coup was necessary, but killing the 13 men on firing squad was not necessary. And I will add 14 because President Tobo was 14. The political bulldog here at Focus on Liberia, Mr. Anthony Sia, was just 3 years old. And so I don't know where I was. Man, you were in Southtown. John Josiah New was in Bopolu. And we have a lot of our our viewers here telling us where they are. We're not going to read all the comments, but thank you so much for letting us know. Joseph Conto, Mr. Jha, let's not forget that President Trump was a very progressive. For example, when Mr. Trump became president representative in 1943, he introduced 400 legislation, including the rights of Liberian women to vote. Elvis is surprised of the sugar coating tonight. He said, "Can we native forget that what they did to our forefathers? Really? What a day, Elvis. Tell us." Sam Wallow, that is a true statement. My mother, an African American who arrived in Liberia in 1962, described the same bad behavior Gonglo just described. She was so upset at the behaviors of the settler community, couldn't believe what she was saying. Eugene Hammer, I'm so surprised, Dr. Gay, you are talking about change take time. President Weah have been in power for 5 years, and you want all the changes to take place in his administration. Let's stay on 1980, man. You're shooting. Jimmy Eastman, only present and recent actions can bring about change. It has been 42 years since the coup. It was chanted as a revolution, but did we see fundamental changes? The war has been over 17 years. Do we see fundamental changes in governance? A lot of comments. Thank you so much, viewers. Fidel say, how do we build Liberia now? Talking would not solve our problems in Liberia. We need skills, tools, and knowledge to build Liberia. Jimmy wanted to know, he said Gonglo. Also, Fidel, he said, how do we build Liberia? Elaxi, education weaponized. Well, then thanks for the largest investment in education since 1847. Jimmy said, Gonglo, you make a point. Education was not widely available for the masses of Liberians, but Tobo began to make strides towards that objective. Livingstone said, great topic today. Our future was destroyed by grown up who wouldn't come to one agreement. Sam Wallace, imperfection, called it what it was. It was a deliberate and intentional system that discriminated against the indigenous people. There was never plan for equity or equality. Be honest. Glenda Jane Jr. said, Gonglo is stuck in the old narrative, in my opinion. Those are more and more comments here. Many comments. Let's read this one from Yangwe Boma. Kalabo Gonglo is speaking from his experience in the interior, from the perspective of the natives, and Sis Massa is speaking from her experience in Monrovia. Jimmy, exactly, Jah, the coup did not correct what it was supposed to. Are we making the correction today? Glenn, like you, Massa, I said thank you so much. Richardson Pace said, let us not pretend that Liberia was some paradise before 1980 coup. The country was basically a backward country. Billions of dollars of foreign investment enriched a few affluent families. The coup actually delayed the civil war by the cosmetic changes it brought. Yes, a lot of someone also said that I read earlier that the change was if the coup had not if the coup of 1980 had not happened, the war was still going to happen. Jason Cassidy, I repeat, Ghana was not placed on its current trajectory until after Gerald Rawlings' second coup. He voluntarily stepped aside and let Ghanaians vote in free and fair elections. So all that, and Jimmy said I should enumerate the gains of the PRC government, and I said, multi-party elections, changing the constitution from saying we the people originating from the United States and all that stuff, right? And then other things that people believe that there were more access to education, and they were a little more, they are blotting out the Congo country divide was something also that happened. There are lots of comments, but our time is fast spent. Joseph Curtis Brewer said the 1980 coup did not bring any change to Liberia whatsoever. It culminated in the 1989 to 2003 Civil War, and we continue to see gradual decline. Ladies and gentlemen, those are some of the comments. We will use the comments and this time now to conclude. Mr. Pat, will you start your concluding statement?
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being on, being here with all you astute gentlemen and lady. So I still stand by my statement that the 1980 event coup was completely unnecessary, and it was a complete negative for our country. The President Talbot has started from his last election, has started to make some significant changes. He had introduced multi-party democracy. That is why Amos Sawyer and others were able to register their parties. He had also reduced the presidential term of office. He had also committed to not running again after 1983. He had started to unite Africa by creating the OAU and bringing it to Senegal. I mean, there was just all these things that he was doing. He had recognized what Israel was doing and basically shut Israel out. He had recognized China, Russia. He had opened up Liberia beyond the Western Front. And all this was shut off after 1980, and we just saw through very narrow lens, what Tobo was made of. And I think it is really, really enlightening now that Liberians are starting to see Tobo from a different lens. History over time has a way of softening things and allowing people to see with a clearer lens. And I'm glad that this generation is getting to see that. And one more point I'll make concerning my Prof Gonglo, just concerning that whole weaponizing education, that kind of rubbed me a little wrong, because it did point to something. For you to weaponize something, it has to be premeditated, it has to be intentional, and it has to be a planned out thing. I don't believe that is the case. I do believe that the government did drop the ball. I believe that if Liberians were more educated, probably 1979 was not going to happen. 1980 probably was going to be a different story. So it did work against those who did not take on the responsibility of educating the masses. The fact that was put in our constitution, that the government is the government responsibility to educate the masses, even though it has not lived up to that. But I think that it was a good lesson for Liberia. I'm hopeful that successive governments will take that into account. But as a whole, I'm hopeful that we've learned a very strong lesson in the last 43 years, and that we can begin to heal and make better decisions as a people and as a government, and actually put Liberia where it's supposed to be.
Thank you. Ms. Washington.
Yeah. So at this time, I do not think that after a while, there is an absolute 100% right or 100% wrong when having these kinds of discussions. However, what I would like to see in these kinds of deliberations is the application of logic. I would like for us to slow down, always be logical when we are presenting our point, because with logic, you can be fair in stuff. How logical were the actions or approaches taken at the time? Were they necessary? Did the change agents accomplish the goals? Did they, was the society or did it change for the better? Did it develop? There's something called development, communication, all of that after wars and civil strife. there should come development. But Liberia has been stuck in neutral. It's because of all these things. There was no green revolution for us after the coup. Yes, there was some form of social and cultural revolution, but they all went the opposite. They didn't yield the kind of positive result that other countries that went through similar turbulent era in their society went through. So for me, it was a complete fiasco. But at this time, I would like for us to, as those of us who are finding ourselves on these forums, much has been given to us in terms of our opportunity to be educated, our opportunity to be exposed and stuff. So I would like for us to try to understand the both sides. Okay, I don't see 100% bad guys here. I don't see 100% good guys here. And the way we understand both sides is it's good to always present, how we feel and where we feel, but let's modify our language, because honestly, one of the things that I was against the coup for was because the kind of fiery rhetorics and language that were introduced on the Liberian scene. Like, for example, people were telling people that, people work for government, they were stealing them, they were stealing their money. Or government officials were roped, and there was no modifier. They didn't say government official of this category. They just said, the in government stealing your money. And as a result, people started targeting people, just assume that everybody who worked in government, was corrupt or stealing money. We saw it in the coup during the war, where they were killing simple messenger who had a government ID card. Is because this, this incitement or rhetoric have been introduced, and people felt that way. Even now, people believe that every single person who works in George Weah government is corrupt, they're useless, they're foolish, they're ignorant. I don't believe so. In Ellie Salif government, much as I have problem with Ellie Salif government, but I recognize that there were decent people in her government. One of those decent people was Tewon Gonglo, and today he stands out. So again, let's be careful how we use strong words. Let's be careful how we use rhetoric to or discuss and describe our situation, because we have been victims of fiery speeches and fiery rhetoric. So as we're trying to come together now to find a middle narrative, let's just be cognizant of all these things.
Thank you, Mr. Gonglo.
Well, I know Massa had tried to make some vein and in and a very this guy's reference to my choice of word, and I actually I chose that weaponized access to education deliberately. We are all Liberians who all read history. We read from different authors, and we've seen things from different perspectives. There are some who have progressive interpretation of events, and some have conservative interpretation of events. There are some who even say they are opposed to change because they don't know what change will bring. There are different sociological theory on that. Okay, so what I would say, because this is a closing statement, I don't intend to open new argument. Even when Mr. Padmo made this reference, we can go into that, because I would say, is there any reason why my mother didn't have access to education, didn't go to school? Can anybody explain to me when she was born, or no school in her village, that her daughter was at the age of maybe 8? Was there any reason why her grandmother, her grandfather didn't go to school? I mean, when Liberia was already independent. So it's a different kind of debate. But I think today we're just looking at a different narrow, a narrow issue. We're not even looking at President Toba's contribution to the nation. We're not even looking at that. I will have different perspective on that. But that be the case, saying we're not opening, we're just making a closing statement. I said earlier in my opening statement that on hindsight, in retrospect, I would say the coup was not necessary. However, they maintain that there were some fundamental changes that took place in Liberia as a result of the coup. One, access to education was no longer restricted as a government policy, as a policy of a ruling class. Two, the right to vote was not tied to property ownership. There was a new constitution of the Second Republic that grants everybody the right, once you obtain the appropriate age, to vote. And the third thing I would say, the is the class system. Let us not pretend there was a class system in Liberia. Dr. Janetta Cole has referenced that extensively. I gave you her name. Just tap Dr. Janetta Cole on YouTube. You see her lectures on Liberia. She's an American Liberian who researched along with her husband from Yale University, a doctoral student of economics in Liberia in the 60s. She's given speeches extensively on Liberia. There was a class system. The 1980 coup ended that class system. It was a class system deliberately designed to maintain the TWP and the ruling class in power perpetually. Those who argue on gradualism, I would say, how long should we wait? Since 1847, even in 1980, we are still asking people to stay wait. Okay, I don't know what type of gradualism is that. You can talk about 20 years, 30 years, we're talking about more than 100 years, more than a century. We are still asking people to have patience. Okay, the coup had a lot of negative because it was not led by change agent. It was not led by people who have learned anything. These were people that, like Dennis said earlier at the beginning, they were even Dr. Gay also referenced that in the Massa, that there has been other authors who have made reference to the CIA involvement, who all know if we discuss whatever or ultra, we'll bring different perspective, because he was a well-revered, respected man internationally on the African scene. He was a founding member of the non-aligned movement. In fact, he was one of those who provided the philosophy for non-aligned movement, which was a darling during the Cold War. So it's a different debate to have. But I would say the coup was not necessary because it did not lead to respect for rule of law, reduction in corruption, holding people accountable for their action. It did not lead to, improvement in the quality of healthcare, the quality of education, the quality.
Thank you, sir.
So that would be my argument.
Thank you, Dr. Gay. You have to unmute yourself if you want us to hear you, sir.
Oh, thank you. Again, thank you, Dennis, for this wonderful show. This is what I want to believe TRC was set up to do, to have the kind of dialogue. So I appreciate that we have Sis Massa, Professor Gonglo, and my own schoolmate here. I eat water potato greens together at St. Patrick's, so we know that was still.
No, that means so ANC member, don't mind.
Yeah, okay, so that's the story. But yeah, I mean, on a serious note, let me share with you a young Talbert's father, a war revolutionary who fought for freedom in America from South Carolina, came on an exodus to Liberia. Today, descendants of his are in Liberia, and from the very community he came from, built one of the most successful schools in Africa called Africa University in Zimbabwe. A school that has more money than Liberia. It has a $1 billion endowment fund. That school should have been built in Ganta, Professor Gonglo. That's where Africa University should have been built. These people from Talbert's community in South Carolina built that school in Zimbabwe. Wonderful school. And we have educated a whole lot of Liberians there. I was also the first Liberian to be educated at that school during the Civil War. So I just want to share the vision of education. We must also note that Talbert...
And why was it built there instead of Liberia, you say?
Because data. In 1985, the wind of change in Liberia, the bad wind of change, has shown that Liberia will be a war-torn country. For some reason, no, I'm serious. They are looking to... I'm a Methodist. The Ganta United Methodist, Ganta Mission will have been a site for this university. Just to let you know, it will have been a site. And just to ask your education yet, a bishop from America called Hatzel had been the bishop of Africa in Liberia. He was in Liberia in 1916. He left and went to Zimbabwe. The very place he went, that's where the university is now built. It's called Africa University. Google it. It's a wonderful school. Today, George Bush has a whole $500 million project there.
I don't see the point. Maybe they knew, somebody knew that they were going to start a war in 1989. So,
hey, I just said the data are there.
Right, so, because to say that because 1985 coup, that's why I don't buy that. But go ahead, conclude.
Okay. So, again, just to make us understand, today we should be actually in a solemn moved the entire country. Nothing was done in Liberia. The fact that we are talking about bicentennial formation of Liberia, this should be part of our history, as the TRC sought out to do, so that we are able to capture all of this movement in our life. The story of our ancestors, the natives, the story of all those who have been involved with the formation of Liberia. So today, it should and ought be an event marked in our heart and a sober reflection. And God bless you for making this show to have such a wonderful reflection on it. And we should never forget this, because to not tell this story and reflect on it, it will be an amnesia, and such amnesia leads to our crisis, as we have seen in the past.
Thank you so much. And Evan Morrissey, Mr. Ja, please answer the question on the show tonight. I would love to hear your perspective on the issue before closing, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to say that the war of 89 to 2003 is what really destroyed Liberia, and not the coup, as many of you have stated. I believe that the war that devastated the country most and killed 250 plus of our compatriots, scattered all throughout West Africa as refugees and displaced people, had little or nothing to do with that. It was not because it was 1980, so it had to be a war. No, that would have been avoided if we were thinking, or as Mr. Gonglo said, if we were educated, if the country was not kept backwards for so long, so that someone coming from the village who was given a car and say, oh, I never had this before. So I don't believe that. The coup of 1980, I think it was inevitable. I regret the death of the people, but it was bound to happen because issues have built up for over centuries. If we go back to the Coup wars, the Gribble wars, where Dwad Nimle and the other people were destroyed, if we go back to the way Tubman especially clamped down on every political opposition and kind of even squashed the kind of multi-party election or multi-party system that was emerging, that was at least trying. Tubman completely destroyed that. Tubman did not build on that. He was scared. You know, he would start something, he'd take one step back, forward, and two steps behind because he was scared of those around him. So most of the time, he was progressive. We can all accept that. But he always had to cave in somehow. Like the elections of the mayor election of Monrovia, you know, he caved into that, to the pressure of his people. And so I believe the reason we are saying this about 1980 because it did not bear the needed fruits it's supposed to. The issues that it came to correct did not correct most of them. It tried with the issue of elections, even though wrecked the election, but many people believe that was a good start. So because it did not correct the system, and so it made things worse. Had it done what it's supposed to do, like it is done in other countries, like in the issue of Ghana, had it been able, Liberia was able to move forward from there. Had we not had the war, and so I personally blame the 1989 to 2003 war as the one being largely responsible for where we are today. If we were to manage from, 1988 College, we still had light, we still had running water, we still had all these things. We still have bunk mines, we have Lamco, we have all these places, right? It is actually the war that devastated the country. And so that's where, but if the coup had not taken place, if the war had not taken place, I believe we'll be in a far better position than we are now. And I blame the war instead of the coup. And that's where I will leave it tonight. And I want to thank all of you for coming. Very short notice. This was very short notice. Thank you so much. And I want to thank our viewers for also being here with us. We want to always encourage you to join us here at Focus on Liberia, where we educate, we elevate, and promote all things Liberia. Tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern and 9 p.m. local time in Monrovia, we're going to be on the radio, Prime FM. Don't forget to tune in. Always, man. Thank you so much for coming. Whether you believe the coup has changed Liberia for better or for worse, we are all Liberians, and that is very important. And even though we don't reach that far to see how we move forward, but it is our duty to move the country forward. Have a good night. And that's why we end with the song that says, "We are all Liberians." Good night and God bless you.
We are Liberians. Liberian people. Liberia.